Hello and welcome back. I'm George Eliason. Now, Ukraine's little man, Volodymyr Zelensky, has been all over the news getting accolades in every way, shape, and form possible. I don't think any leader will get this many kudos until the next coming of Jesus Christ. Now, Zelensky was named Financial Times Man of the Year, and that's just a start. He's been compared to Thomas Jefferson and the George Washington for his generation. I mean, think about this. This is a Ukrainian nationalist, and he's an opportunist, and quite frankly, a thief of your tax dollars. But this isn't new. As a matter of fact, in the 1936 OUN publication, The Nationalist, which was published in America. Now, this was a Bandera nationalist publication. And if you're not familiar with the Bandera, they staffed the Holocaust camps across Europe and actually were the ones doing the executions. They also committed the atrocities during the Ukrainian Holocaust. An additional 5.6 million people were murdered. But what they had to say about Ukrainian nationalism is that nationalism is the love of country and the willingness to sacrifice for her. A person brought up as a Ukrainian nationalist will make a 100% better American citizen than one who is not. Was it Nazis or fascism that guided Washington, Lincoln, or other statesmen to make the U.S. a world power? Or was it American nationalism? This should concern you because this is the politics of the DNC and Andrea Chalupa and Alexandra Chalupa's diaspora today. Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari had this to say about Zelensky's Ukraine and its influence on America and Europe, and he had no qualms about this.
But it's the objection to the autocratic Putinist state, and that form of that political system is what they don't like and what they want to overthrow.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting to me, and maybe I'll switch to Yuval can talk about this too. One of the other interesting things about Ukraine is the degree to which, without anybody ever telling them what is the difference between ethnic nationalism and civic nationalism, they have chosen a form of civic nationalism. In other words, you can be Ukrainian if that's your idea of who you are. You can speak Russian, you can speak Ukrainian, you can be Jewish. Ukraine has a Jewish president. But as long as you are willing to participate in that national project, you're on our side. So it's not that you're a member of this particular tribe. It's that you're a member of the community. Yuval, could you situate that idea for us? Is that something is that new and recent in history, and would you make the same observation about Ukraine?
Well, I think that the whole war is about the existence of the Ukrainian nation. Putin's idea is that there is no Ukraine. This is his whole rationale, his whole reason for the war. He's built this fantasy in his head that Ukraine doesn't exist, that Ukrainians are just Russians, and that they want to be absorbed by Russia and are prevented by some gang of Nazis. And this fantasy has led him to invade Ukraine, expecting that Zelensky will just flee, the army would surrender, and the population would throw flowers on the Russian tanks. And he's just completely wrong about everything. Ukraine, as we've just heard, and as we see, is a very, very real nation. Zelensky didn't flee. The army is fighting like hell, and the population is throwing Molotov cocktails on the Russian tanks, not flowers. And in this sense, he is already lost. Putin has already lost the war, because this is a war about the very existence of the Ukrainian nation. And now the entire world knows. I mean, I don't know what people knew about Ukraine a week ago or 2 weeks ago. Now everybody around the world knows that Ukraine is a very, very real nation. And you see the admiration around the world for Ukraine. And I think there is something deeper happening here, which also explains the reaction that I see in Europe, in the USA, and elsewhere. that, you know, the West has been torn, and you spoke about different kinds of nationalism. The West has been torn in recent years in a culture war between left and right, between liberals and conservatives, which really revolved around the question of nationalism and liberalism. We somehow got this mistaken idea in the West that you have to choose, that nationalism and liberalism are opposite, and you can be one or the other. And this is the deep root of the culture war in the West. And Ukraine showed us this is not true. You don't need to think in these binary terms. Nationalism and liberalism can be allies. If you understand nationalism not as hatred of foreigners or hatred of minorities, but as loving your compatriots and taking care of them, then nationalism and liberalism go together. They unite around the values of freedom and of taking care of your fellow citizens. And this is why both left and right, I've been watching, CNN and Fox News, they are suddenly on the same page. They are cheering the same heroes. So I think that one very important change that can come out of this war is that maybe this is the chance to end the culture war in the West and to remind ourselves that there is no contradiction between liberalism and nationalism, and that they both have the same enemy in the figure of Putin and in the ideology of Putinism.
Now, Zelensky wants to be the most powerful leader in Europe, and he's been compared to JFK. And as a matter of fact, he's just been declared the most powerful leader in Europe. This is just one of the appellations he's getting. Now, Zelensky, in reality, is an opportunist, a thief, and a Ukrainian nationalist leader. But what is a Ukrainian nationalist? Now, this is a question that you should demand answered. According to Jonathan Levy, in the intermarium, Wilson, Madison, and East Central European Federalism, Levy is a member of the International Criminal Bar at The Hague, who holds a PhD in political science and has taught terrorism and diplomatic theory at Norwich University. This is a guy that knows a thing or two. Well, they got their start in 1949 when CIA Director Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, in a letter to the chairman of the Displaced Persons Committee, made official a change in policy towards the OUN. He acknowledged that while the organization had collaborated with the Nazis during the Second World War, which is an understatement, its members were to be considered solely as anti-Soviets able to find common ground with new partners. The CIA director did warn, however, the Bandera faction was made up of extreme nationalists. And these are the people that say they will make 100% better Americans than you. And what you're seeing now in America going on is their attempt to actually put that into play. Reclassification as anti-Soviet, better known as anti-communist, paved the way for a quiet nationalist invasion of the United States over 50 years. If only Ukrainian nationalists are fit to be Americans, well, then they needed to change America. Because remember, in their minds, they are perfect Americans. And on their way to doing this, as a matter of fact, by 1960, the nationalist emigre groups gained their first major victory for the fight to establish nationalism in America. In New York City, they hosted the Stars and Stripes Gala Affair in July 1960 that punctuated Captive Nations Week celebrations. At the parade, on the podium were every prominent Jewish leader from America, 87 plus U.S. senators and U.S. congressmen, New York's mayor, the governor, and the Captive Nations leaders, which included at least 7 former Third Reich SS officers. The nationalist Ukrainians marching in the parade were from Stepan Bandera's army in World War II. Now, can you imagine Jewish leaders on a podium celebrating the murderers at the Holocaust camps? in New York City. This actually happened. And these were the parents of Andrzej Dobryansky, the UCCA head, and the DNC operative, as well as Alexandra Chalupa. And from 1945 until today, these same Ukrainian nationalist groups have been trying to spark World War III. And look how close we are to that today. Now, Time magazine also named Volodymyr Zelensky Man of the Year for 2022. And this isn't as big an accomplishment as you think. Time magazine puts the person that had the most impact on politics internationally on their cover. So yes, you know, in a very meaningful way, that is Zelensky. America has never been so broke over one thief in its history. And this thief sparked a wave of nepotism and thievery in the US Congress. So is Zelensky actually supportive of these OUN characters? Well, at the Supreme Court of the Ukraine a week ago, and without the right of appeal, they overturned the Nuremberg trial decision and recognized the symbols of the SS Galicia, which is just crazy. They recognize that it didn't have anything to do with Nazism. And if you understand anything about the Third Reich, the only members of the SS that were allowed to wear SS on their collars were Germans. Every other SS group had their own insignia. Galicians had the Carpathian Lion because they were from the Carpathian province of the Hungarian Empire. It was only afterwards that it actually distilled down into a Ukraine. That was after the Soviet Union got its start, long afterwards. Now, the Ukrainian government recognizing this particular group, and you say, well, why should I be worried about that? Why should I care? Have you ever seen Schindler's List? Did you see what they did in those ghettos? That was SS Galicia. And another OUN group that was there were called the Tronicky Men. These were the guards at the death camps that committed the Holocaust and killed all those people. Another group were the Derwanger SS. They were also Ukrainian, and they were considered by historians to be the absolute wildest murderers in the European theater during the war. So you see, by doing this, Volodymyr Zelensky isn't just signifying that he supports nationalism, he supports the nationalisms that killed 5.6 million Ukrainians and 6 million Jews. That's quite a legacy for him. Let's go into other things that Zelensky's doing. Now, in America, we pride ourselves on our Constitution, our constitutional Bill of Rights, and we declare these freedoms God-given. Well, Volodymyr Zelensky has decided that Christianity isn't God-given, it's given by the state, and he's banning the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. This church has a 1,000-year history. It goes back to the beginning of the Kiev Rus, almost 1,000 years before the word Ukraine was ever mentioned in correlation with any people. He's banning Christianity. They're arresting the priests, the bishops. They're fining congregants if they want to go to church, and they'll be arresting them soon. Separation of church and state? If you're in America, you should be outraged. If you're not outraged and you can support Ukraine on this, listen, honestly, I'd rethink your faith if you call yourself Christian. This is going on, and it's being reported worldwide. if you look at this Orthodox publication, they're really concerned about this because it's their people. Zelensky is actually offering bishops and priests in prisoner swaps with Russia instead of giving back Russian soldiers. Zelensky's also banned political rivals. You don't have the right in Ukraine to belong to a different political party, to think different politically, to have other ideas. And I've got news for you, conservatives. It's especially so against any type of conservative thought in Ukraine. And they're doing their best to tamp down MAGA in the US. Now, he didn't just do this, but Zelensky's also destroyed free speech. And he's consolidated all media into one broadcast arm. Do you actually think any truth is coming out of Ukraine? Or is it just what the little man wants you to hear? Now, when you consider the fact that you don't have political rights, you don't have the rights socially, you don't have freedom of religion, you can't read the news, there's no freedom of the press, this is somebody you want to celebrate? Is this somebody you want to support? How much U.S. money, your tax dollars, is going to do this? And how long will you celebrate this man? This is an outrage. It's a slap in the face to everything America stands for, or everything America stood for. You see, Zelensky knows that the writing's on the wall unless they make the same type of changes in America. And that's what's going on right now. So if you want to stop it and say no, you have to do it in Ukraine first. Zelensky is what you'd call a Trojan horse by the DNC to get you to applaud them taking your own rights away. That's what he is.
Since I knew that you knew. By the way, that won't work. See, I took your balls.
On November 30th, the president of the European Commission estimated that over 20,000 civilians and 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died in Ukraine to date. Now, this is a very, very important statement. And I think she was being very, very genuine about this. But here's the reality. Since February 17th of this year, the armed formations of Ukraine have bombed 8,897 residential buildings. These are homes and apartments. 2,113 civilian infrastructure facilities, including 106 medical and 424 educational institutions. They tend to go for kindergartners and grammar schools. 813 social security facilities, 59 critical infrastructure facilities, 709 electricity, water, heat, and gas supply. Now, does it sound like they're trying to fight against Russia or against the people? Where she went wrong and where you need to call her on is if only 20,000 civilians died, well, for the last 5 years, year after year after year, they gave the same casualty figure for civilians in Donbass, 13,000. So 5 years ago, 13,000. 4 years ago, it was still 13,000. 3 years ago, it was 13,000, regardless of what the casualties actually were. But now she's saying the total is 20. Ukraine is complaining about their electricity being shut off. But this has only been since February they did all these things. Of course, they spent the last almost decade doing this and a lot more. Day after day, week after week, month after month. Those figures are just from February until today. So is Zelensky actually telling the truth? Is he lying? What's going on? What should you believe? Well, we have mainstream media here laying it out for you. We have them saying it themselves. This is who they are. They're 100% better than you. And they support Joe Biden. And they don't support you. Now, if they make 100% better American than you would, well, then it would make sense for them to take your rights away, which, what you see going on, is just that. I'm George Eliason. It's really time for you to rethink these things.
Volodymyr, in the years I've known you, I've always thought of you as a champion for democracy. And now, democracies around the world are lucky to have you as our champion. Hear, hear.